Good morning in the UK and good evening in Australia. I'm Joanne Holland, the Executive Director for the Australian UK Chamber of Commerce. And today I'm pleased to be part of a webinar sponsored by Telstra on evolving your ESG, that's Environmental, Social and Governance Strategy. Climate change affects everything from geopolitics to economics to migration. It shapes cities, life expectancies and even wine lists. Supply chains, technological change and climate targets will demand more capital investment in the next 10 years. Governments are likely to focus on getting businesses to make clear, detailed plans for how they will achieve net zero. During COP26, the UK government further announced that by 2023, all publicly listed companies and financial institutions in the UK will be required to publish plans detailing how they will meet the UK's 2050 net zero target. This not only forces companies to act, but sends a ripple effect through their supply chains. COP26 has sent a clear message to companies: measure your carbon footprint and instigate a plan to move towards net zero or risk lagging behind competitors. So today we'll be discussing how businesses will be evolving their ESG strategy in the wake of COP26, how we can move from corporate pledges into plans. We have three excellent speakers today: James Harrison, Head of Telstra UK, Denise Bauer, Executive Director, External Engagement, Mott McDonald, and Yanis Bile, Associate with Herbert Smith Freehills LLP. Our first speaker today is James Harrison. James has over 20 years experience in the IT and communications business, gained in various roles with BT Global Services, Syntegra, Nortel Networks, and now Telstra. Having spent prolonged periods in Switzerland, Italy, Hong Kong, Singapore, and more recently Sweden, he takes a truly global perspective to address challenges and opportunities for Telstra and their customers. James is the Acting Managing Director for EMEA at Telstra, and in his leadership role, he enables people and businesses to thrive globally with the use of software-defined platforms. So welcome, James.
Thank you, Joanne. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
That's good to hear, Joanne. Right, so I've just got a few slides to share, so bear with me 1 second while I play with this technology, and hopefully everything is smooth. Okay, a little bit of a delay, but can everyone see my slides? If you can just confirm, Joanne, that would be great.
Yes, James, we can see those. Thank you. Please proceed.
Thanks, Millie. Right, Joanne, well, thanks for that that intro, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here on behalf of Telstra, and to tell you a little bit about some of the ESG strategies and goals that Telstra has in place. Joanne there was referring to COP26, and I think that was quite a big thing for all of us in big corporates. And I think one of the key things we saw at COP26 was a shift from the focus on governments setting targets and putting measures in place for climate change. We saw a shift to corporates and their role and responsibilities in addressing climate change and building a sustainable future. So that was a huge shift we saw, and I think that impacted all corporates globally. And for Telstra, as Australia's leading technology company, we have a really important role to addressing the challenges we face. And as a corporation, we are committed to leading by example and using our scale and our voice globally to help get better outcomes across all our business units globally. So generally, and this was actually quite new to me, so I'm not a sustainable expert by any means. I'm a telecoms guy for 20 years, as Joanna pointed out. So a lot of this sustainability information is quite new to me, and I'm getting up to speed. It's obviously very important, but I'm on a bit of a learning curve myself here. But I was quite surprised to hear after COP26, where we did have a delegation from Telstra there, that telecoms organisations are quite large contributors to CO2 in the environment. So in terms of, well, there was a Boston Consulting Group report that came out last year that said that telecoms firms are responsible to 3 to 4% of global CO2 emissions. So to put that into context, that's twice as much as the civil aviation industry. So possibly more concerning is that with the data traffic set to increase by 60% year on year, this CO2 contribution for the telecoms industry is set to increase to 14% by 2040. So that's just a couple of quite big numbers, just to put into perspective, I suppose, the importance that the telecoms industry in general have to play in helping to solve this climate crisis. So with this level of impact as an industry, Telstra or any other telco organisations, we can't afford any more inaction. So Telstra, hopefully leading the way, and is leading the way in many areas, has built a robust sustainability plan covering a range of initiatives that it has embedded into the core of our corporate strategy. So I'm just going to sort of spend a little bit of time now just talking about what we've got in place. I think the main driver from why Telstra has done this is that the driver is to make, yes, a difference in our organisation and to change the culture in our organisation, but also to lead the way for our customers, suppliers, and communities to all play their part. It's not about one organisation or one small group making a difference here. It is about the wider society making a difference. But given the scale that Telstra has, we believe we do have a big part to play, particularly in Australia, where we are central to well, one of the largest organisations in Australia and one of the biggest consumers of energy and contributors to climate change. We do have a huge part to play in Australia, but more generally globally, we do have a very large presence and a loud voice that we think we can make a big impact. So we reviewed our approach to sustainability and we've taken steps over the last couple of years to closely align our strategy and to align that sustainability strategy to align with our strategy and purpose and broader organizational objectives. So the strategy that we now have in place consists of 3 main pillars where we believe our expertise can make a meaningful impact, and we see that there is the opportunity to drive innovation and leverage some of our technology-based solutions to really make an impact. So the 3 pillars that we've got in place are trusted operations, digital inclusion, and environmental action. So this is our strategy on a page, and underneath those 3 main pillars, we've set 3 new resource efficiency goals. So they are to reuse and recycle 500,000 devices each year up to 2025. 100% of Telstra branded packaging is to be made from recycled material and fully recyclable by 2022, and increase recycling rate by 85% by 2025. And I should say as well, underpinning, so that's the sort of the resource efficiency goals that we have in place, but we also have a series of clear environmental goals that reflect our ambition as well. So these are pretty big numbers, so I hope everyone's paying a bit of attention. But the first one we have is to be carbon neutral in all our operations by 2020, and I'm pleased to say that we did achieve this in July, not through direct impact, but we did actually have a massive carbon offsetting purchasing program. Number 2 was 100% renewable energy generation equivalent to our consumption by 2025. And the third goal is to reduce absolute emissions by at least 50% by the year 2030. So we've got the 3 pillars, and then we've got the resource goals and environmental goals underneath that. And I'm pleased to say we have made some great progress. So over the last year, I mentioned we've achieved carbon neutral certification in July 2020, and that was awarded to us through the Australian government's Climate Active programme. And I'm really pleased to say that we're on track to reach 50% absolute emissions reduction by 2030, which is our target. In FY21, just talking about those carbon credits that we purchased a further 855,000 carbon credits last year, and that added to the total of 3.4 million credits that we purchased over the last 2 years. And also this year, worth mentioning, is that we joined the UN's Global Compact Business Ambition, and that's to keep climate temperature rise to a maximum of 1.5% this year. So we've pledged, in addition to a load of other corporations, to limit that. Now, I did say, obviously, a lot of the activity that Telstra does is focused on Australia, but we are a global organisation, and we do want to use our voice and make an impact globally and in all the regions that we operate. So here in EMEA, we are part of the Climate Change Agreement in the UK, and we also comply to the 2018 Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting Scheme. And here in the UK, we actually have quite a large data centre we call it the London Hosting Centre, and it's in Docklands. And that's obviously a huge contributor to CO2 emissions. To put it into context, a data centre a similar size to the LHC consumes the equivalent of power of about 9,000 British homes per annum. So a huge contributor to CO2. And I'm really pleased to say that since November 2020, through a lot of commitment and financial investment, the LHC, as of November, is running on 100% renewable energy sources. So a great success here for us locally in EMEA with our London data centre. Key to a lot of everything we do in sustainability is the measurement and reporting. And from Telstra side, we've got quite a comprehensive approach to sustainability measurement, and it's our board that's responsible for overseeing and monitoring the effectiveness of our business strategy. And they receive annual updates on what's going on, and we measure our sort of progress at board level twice a year. We've also set up what we call the Sustainability Centre of Excellence, which is responsible for planning and reporting on all our progress against our objectives and goals in the sustainability area. I'd also highlight as well the importance of stakeholder engagement. So a lot of the activities that we're working on in the ESG space are included in our annual reporting suite. And we've also produced the report here called the Bigger Picture Sustainability Report that forms part of our annual report, but is also available separately. And I would encourage everyone on the call to take a read of that report. There's some great stuff in there, and it does talk a little bit more about the work that Telstra is doing in this space and more generally. And finally, I'd just like to say, talk a little bit around collaboration, because achieving success and making progress in this really important area is all about collaboration. And Telstra are just one part of what we're looking to do here. So Telstra has joined up to a number of different bodies and are signatories of some of the best, most impactful environmental initiatives out there in the industry, in the tech industry. So I'll just cover a couple of them. So we are signatories of the Joint Audit Cooperation, and this is an association of telecom operators which verify, assess and develop corporate and social responsibility practices. We're also signatory of the Global E-Sustainability Initiative, and that's an organisation that collaborates with leading ICT companies to provide a leading source of impartial information and best practices. We're also signatories of the Telco Together Foundation, and that's a collection of telecom organisations banding together to make a positive impact, mainly in Australia, but we're looking to take that globally. And we're also part of the FTSE for Good, which is a series of benchmarking and tradable indexes for ESG investors, which was launched in 2001. And we actually have our own sustainability awards as well that we run for our suppliers in Australia to encourage environmental responsibility throughout the entire supply chain. So that was a whip through of some of the things that Telstra is doing. Like I said, I think the big shift in COP26 was definitely the move from a focus on governments to corporates. And I think we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion now talking about some of the responsibilities that corporates have to play and how to sort of measure and administer it. And I think we've got a few questions later on, so looking forward to answering those a bit later. So back over to you, Joanne, to introduce the next speakers.
Thank you, James. And I'm sure there'll be lots of very interesting questions to be asked of you. I'd now like to, sorry about that, I've got a frog there. I'd now like to introduce Denise Bauer. Denise is a member of the Executive Board of Mott MacDonald and is the Executive Director responsible for external engagement. She provides board-level governance for Mott MacDonald's response to the climate emergency across the business. Denise has had an impressive career in the infrastructure industry and as a professor in the School of Civil Engineering at the University of Leeds. Welcome, Denise.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks to Australia UK Chamber and to Telstra for inviting me to speak today. Really delighted to participate and represent Mott MacDonald. For those who don't know us, we're a leading global infrastructure management and development company, and we do have a significant global footprint, including businesses in both Australia and the UK. In fact, our presence across APAC continues to build rapidly as we're responding to the ever-changing market opportunities there. So in Australia, with more than 1,000 people, our operations extend along the eastern seaboard and across to Western Australia. Our experience is really that Australia and the UK share a mutual respect and are natural collaborators, so we can and should aspire to be global leaders on matters pertaining to climate. Specifically for Mott MacDonald, our ESG strategy, including our approach to climate change, is an absolute top priority for two reasons. It's integral to our group purpose and strategy and everything we stand for as an employee-owned ethical business. And actually it also makes eminent business sense, doesn't it? So for example, the International Energy Agency estimates that the world will need to invest around $4 trillion a year by 2030 on upgrading energy infrastructure to reach net zero. So our clients and our partners are increasingly seeking out our support to help them make their transition too. Whatever your view on COP26, it undoubtedly, as we just heard from James, represented a real turning point, because not only was it about business turning up, but ESG and climate change moved from a fringe issue to being front and centre of everybody's minds. For the first time, nobody tried to argue about the climate science. It was absolutely all about the response. And businesses demonstrated that they are leading the way across that whole ESG spectrum. So for the remainder of my remarks, I'm going to focus on the E in ESG. I mean, this is a really wide-ranging topic, and who knows where the panel discussion will take us. But reporting, as you mentioned, Jo, on non-financial compliance and disclosure and reporting is absolutely sort of part of my remit. So happy to go wherever the conversation takes us. At Mott MacDonald, we made a commitment to achieve net zero across our global business by 2040 2 years ago. And our benchmark is the science-based targets, which require a 90% reduction in our emissions. So that's that's a big reduction, isn't it? And having focused on carbon neutrality for the entirety of our global business, we're now in the process of decarbonising and aligning our business to achieve net zero by that 2040 date, or sooner if we can. That's the absolute backstop date. What we realise is that this does require transformational change in the way we do business. So, for example, with our own operations, all of our offices will need to move to green energy, and that's globally. So that's not as straightforward as it might be if we only had offices in a handful of countries. We'll need to drastically cut the number of flights that our colleagues make, and work with our supply chain to lower their emissions too, as the footprint broadens as you go for net zero rather than carbon neutrality. And we're not just limiting our ambitions to our own operations. We do want to help our clients fulfil their net zero ambitions too. I mean, infrastructure, I'm sure, as you can all imagine, is a massive source of carbon emissions, both in its construction and during operation. So since helping to write the past 2080 guidelines, Mott MacDonald has been a global leader in addressing carbon emissions from infrastructure. for almost a decade. We're now deploying our world-leading carbon management experts and the latest digital technology, such as Mott MacDonald Water Carbon Portal, across our largest projects to help our clients find the best ways to reduce their impact, because sometimes people just don't know where to start eating that elephant. We've also announced our partnership with Envision to help clients accelerate their journey to net zero too. So just going back to COP26, it not only focused on decarbonisation, it also focused attention on resilience and the related issue of finance. And this is a really key issue for Mott MacDonald as one of the leaders in the Coalition for Climate Resilient Investment. It's also a particular concern for our international development business, because that helps some of the world's population who are most vulnerable to the effects of climate change tackle the challenges that they're facing. So to conclude, Mott MacDonald has responded to the need to establish a robust programme that meets consistently increasing ESG expectations, whether these are around net zero, social outcomes, or the way that our organisation and those organisations that are part of our supply chain are governed. We recognise that we, along with the wider infrastructure industry, have further to go in fulfilling our aspirations on climate change, but we are confident that we're taking the right steps, and we're absolutely determined to play a leading role in helping humanity to overcome this unprecedented challenge. We will continue to drive hard on issues of EDI, and our staff understand the vital role that they play in establishing an environment that's fair and equal to all. And we're clear that how a company fosters its people and culture and the standards it sets around governance have ripple effects on the broader community to ultimately pave the way for a sustainable future for all. So I'll leave it there for now, Jo, if that's okay, but delighted to sort of dig into any of those particular points as we sort of widen out to the broader panel discussion.
Thank you, Denise. We'll come back to some of the points that you raised there, but I'd like to now introduce Janis Bille. Janis is a corporate lawyer with Herbert Smith Freehill, specialising in ESG, renewable energy and climate change. And he was in Glasgow during the COP26 as a speaker at the Sustainable Innovation Forum and managed HSF's COP26 related thought leadership campaign. Janis has advised companies on climate-related matters ranging from policy and strategy advice to climate-related reporting, greenwashing and litigation. And in addition, he's worked with companies on investments in renewable energy assets and wider decarbonisation efforts. His areas of focus are offshore wind, electricity storage and carbon markets. Welcome, Janis.
Thank you very much, Liz. I would like to start by just giving a very quick overview about Herbert Smith Freehills. We are a global law firm with offices across the world and with a particular footprint in Australia, Asia Pac and Europe. And particularly relevant for today, we have a globally integrated climate change and ESG team. Today, I'll particularly speak about climate change, but I'll also link this to the wider ESG discussion, as climate change and ESG are intrinsically interlinked. Now, to start off, ESG is ultimately a financial concept intended to allow investors to make informed decisions about a company's long-term sustainability. So the rough question is whether a company's business strategy will still exist and work in 15 years or more. And to make that assessment, investors require data on a company's performance in a variety of areas, which can positively or negatively affect a company's future. As James and Denise have already mentioned, COP26 was a turning point for climate change and the E in ESG, and with that ESG more widely, because the climate conference did not necessarily deliver on the high expectations that were placed on it, but because it gave this shifting stance for the business world and for wider attention of ESG issues more widely, so that climate change is now a top priority on boardrooms, and very rightly so, and ESG is being integrated much, much more in business and business strategies across the board. However, it's very important to keep in mind that ESG is not only concerned with the E, but very importantly also the S and the G, and that many issues across the ESG board are interlinked. Now, let's take the example of pollution here. If a company's activities are polluting a region, this appears to be primarily an E issue. However, where this starts to affect the communities of the region, it also becomes an S issue. And if the underlying pollution is a result of a company's lack of environmental policy and waste management strategy, that reflects a governance issue. Therefore, what ESG requires is really a wholesome approach to issues with long-term sustainability of a company at the heart of every consideration. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because climate change is something that has elements that affect the E, the S, and the G, and therefore is so important to be taken on by companies in that wholesome approach. Now, COP26 and the lead up thereto created a world stage for businesses to integrate climate and consider the complexity of climate change. Because it's not only that through our emissions, we and our companies have an impact on climate, but climate change already has and will continue to have an increasingly stronger impact on companies, the supply chains our businesses might rely on, as well as the conditions our workforce have to cope with, and more. As James has already rightfully mentioned, COP26 reflects a shift where businesses have taken the central role beyond governments that were, let's say, on the steering wheel before, in setting targets and pushing towards, pushing forward the climate agenda that has come to the forefront of the public's consideration. Now, over the past years, we've worked with a number of companies across different sectors to assist this process, help conduct efficient and effective climate change audits, as well as wider ESG audits, and integrate the required processes and set in place necessary internal structures for companies to move forward. From a legal perspective, we are seeing a high amount of climate-related regulation and legislation being passed in various jurisdictions, with the UK and EU taking leadership positions so far. But ever since 2019, Australia's regulatory landscape is shifting quite strongly as well. And under President Biden, the US is putting more attention again on climate. One particularly active space in the ESG equation is transparency. As I mentioned, investors rely on data to assess a company's sustainability, and climate-related reporting has taken center stage over the past year. Here, particularly, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures set out a framework, a voluntary framework developed in 2017 that was developed at international level, but has now started to become mandatory in a number of countries, including the UK, where to date all listed companies have to comply and disclose climate-related information in line with this framework. And from 2023 onwards, large private companies will also be required to comply with a system that is very closely aligned to the TCFD framework. That will also involve the preparation of climate transition plans that have to be prepared by the companies. In the US, just yesterday, the Security and Exchange Commission announced or issued a highly anticipated proposal requiring the disclosure of climate-related information by domestic and foreign public companies in their registration statements and periodic SEC filings, which shows just another vast jurisdiction jumping on this train of climate disclosures. And this is where we've been trying to actively help our clients to understand and address these regulatory changes, which can be very daunting and overwhelming just by the sheer amount of change that's happening in this wider ESG space. And in particular, to help companies to disclose climate-related matters, it's essential for companies to understand how climate affects your business and collect the required data now to enable future compliance and be able to disclose going forward. However, it's important that this is something that's done all across the general value chain, involving small and medium-sized companies, as well as the large companies that are currently affected. But what we are seeing is really that this is something that's just going to become bigger. It's just going to become more, and it's essential for everyone to start acting now and really integrate this going forward. But at this point, I'll hand back for the Q&A.
Thank you, Giannis. We'll now open the session up to questions. So we'll just make sure that we've got everybody visible, and if anybody has some questions, if you can just put them into the chat. I'll start off though by asking the first question, and I think it's to each panelist. So we might start off with James, but how do you think, James, is ESG affecting a company's competitive advantage?
Thanks, John. I'm trying to start my video here, but my video won't start for some reason, but hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah.
That's good. So yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting one. I'd like to say it was a huge competitive advantage. I mean, what we are seeing from a lot of our customers. So with our large customers, we do what we call quarterly business reviews with them, and increasingly those big customers are asking to hear and learn a little bit about what we're doing with our ESG strategy, and that's not from well, it's a little bit around sort of checking us to make sure that we've got one in place and that we're a responsible operator, but it's a lot more around sharing some of the ideas and sort of creating a supplier and partner ecosystem to address some of the challenges that corporates are facing. So it's just sharing the ideas. So from that regard, a competitive advantage for us, Telstra, it does help us to sort of partner and create sort of a more sticky, close partnership relationship with our customers. But I think more generally, it's not so much creating a competitive advantage. It's the cost or the risk of businesses not having an ESG strategy in place. And I think I would argue that organizations nowadays, and certainly in the future, if they don't have a considerable ESG strategy in place, that they will struggle to do business and sort of meet some of the regulations and requirements of doing business in the future. So I think for the time being, I think Telstra's definitely leading the way in a lot of the stuff we're doing in our industry. So it's a competitive advantage, but I do think that's probably quite short-lived. I think it's more about the risk of not having something in place that will affect companies moving forward.
Thank you, James. And Yanis, what are you seeing with your client base?
Now, we're seeing that ESG and sustainability is becoming an increasingly important topic for companies across the board. For us, that of course is a great opportunity to engage with them much more widely and to assist in this process, kind of a journey that we can do together. As I mentioned, we help companies conducting audits with regards to ESG exposure, understanding the relevant aspects and priorities, because what is important to understand is ESG is not going to mean the same thing for every company. ESG is something that's very intrinsic to a company's business strategy and business as a whole, and different sectors have different priority areas or different exposures to different ESG related risks and opportunities. And through that, this engagement also provides really that strategy opportunity, not just for us as a law firm, but for our clients first and foremost, by understanding really where to place on this ESG scale, which areas to prioritize and to include, really to ensure that the long-term sustainability of the company is ensured, and also to not miss certain opportunities. And there are few examples of where this has gone really well and where this has gone quite badly for some players within the wider economy, which can have huge repercussions if ESG risk is ignored, mainly on a reputational basis for a company that can then have personal consequences for the board as well.
Thank you. And Denise, Mott MacDonald and supply chains, what are you seeing there in terms of, all those people along the value chain that are part of, the Mott MacDonald ecosystem? How are you seeing they're responding?
Well, I think as the other speakers are saying, nobody will maintain their license to operate, especially not in an infrastructure space, if they don't have credible ESG credentials, Joe. So what we're seeing is increasingly organisations, so us, our suppliers, being asked to evidence, our clients are asking us to evidence our net zero plans, our wider ESG credentials, whether that's around EDI or other matters, really. I think one of the tricky things for ourselves and our suppliers is that, just as Yanis and James have been saying, this is quite a complex landscape, isn't it? There's no single recognised standard to report against. So if you take any one of the pillars, so let's pick on the E of ESG, and I have one of my colleagues, Ben, who's leading on a project on this for us as a business, then you can drill down into a better appreciation of a more standard approach. an approach which can be audited by recognised authorities like the Carbon Trust, say, who we choose, and really demonstrate our credentials. But as you widen out across, you know, a breadth of other areas, it does become trickier to be able to really shine that light on all different organisations and make an assessment without creating an industry and in and of itself. But Ben, I don't know whether, if that's okay, Joe, I don't know whether there's anything that you want to say about the sorts of conversations we're having with our suppliers, especially around our sort of carbon neutrality and net zero project.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think we're increasingly, there is the whole issue of regulatory compliance and what our clients are demanding and expecting and so on. But I think I just also wanted to emphasize the positive opportunities that exist and clients seeking us out to help them decarbonize. So, for example, one of the world's largest aluminium companies, which are a hugely energy intensive industry, has come to us and saying, actually, how can you help us to get to net zero? So there's a really big market opportunity here, as well as achieving the minimum that our clients rightly expect.
Thank you, Ben. This is a question for James and Denise. What demands are your customers making on you to prove the sustainability and efficiency of the services you're delivering to them? Has that changed at all lately?
Denise, do you want to go first, or
James, you go for it, and then I'll chip in.
Okay, cool. So in terms of I suppose direct stuff, not that much. It's more sort of just informing about sort of the general structure and approach we've got. But we are increasingly starting to see it being regulated a little bit more. So Telstra does, we sort of have the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure that's part of some of the work we do, and it goes into our annual report. So if there is a request for certification of the number of carbon credits that we've purchased, or the certification that we have achieved carbon neutrality, we do obviously have the certification to back that up. But I would say it's not necessarily mandated. It's definitely more sort of a more discussion, advisory, and interest in what we're doing more generally. But my personal view is we are going to see that shift a little bit, and we are going to see more regulation and more certification and more standardization of that measurement and certification coming out in the future.
I think for us, just building on what you're saying, James, that point about certification, standardization, you know, it should be helpful to a degree, shouldn't it, to be clearer and level the playing field? Because whilst any single organisation tries to trailblaze, so as I say, we've been carbon neutral across our whole global footprint, including our contracting business, certified. You know, we've been doing that for a couple of years now. If everybody's not doing the same, and there does come a cost with that carbon neutrality, doesn't there? It takes a certain amount of investment to decarbonise. So if everybody's not having to do the same, it can slightly start to chip away at your competitive advantage if you're not careful. What we've been doing, as Ben says, though, is sort of flip that into more of an opportunity and look for greater degrees of alignment with our clients. So if I look at the UK market, you know, I think I mentioned earlier, government does require, Cabinet Office requires us to have a plan that demonstrates how we will achieve objectives aligned with their own objectives. So I think that's great, because it means we can have really meaningful conversations with them about some of the things that have always been hard to tackle. So in infrastructure, whilst as engineers, we've always wanted to have conversations about whole life of an asset. Typically, the cycle has focused right up on the front end. You know this, Joe, don't you? We've talked about it before. Mm-hmm. You make those trade-offs early on in the whole totality of a project life cycle. Now, this agenda has opened up that whole life cycle conversation in a way that we weren't able to have before. So whilst on the one hand, I think there is that challenge of sort of navigating all of the sort of technical, legal, other requirements that there are. On the other hand, there's a massive opportunity around alignment and having a whole life of an asset and its operation and use in service conversation, which not everybody's been open to having previously.
Thank you, Denise. I mean, one of the things, coming back on that theme about supply chains, because it's one thing for organisations to have their own ESG strategy and a plan, But of course, many organisations are dependent on their supply chains. So where you've got global supply chains, how can organisations best ensure that all their partners are following it? I mean, that becomes a very, huge strategy in itself of how you review your supply chains and how you monitor their contribution to your overall ESG strategy. Perhaps, Giannis, have you got any comments about your client base and how they're monitoring their supply chains?
Yeah, sure. Of course, we're seeing the bigger the company there, the bigger the leverage power that can be applied in order to, in some way, I don't want to say dictate, but inspire certain practices or support certain practices. So as taking one practical example, one of our clients in the extractive industry is one of the largest bulk charterers with regards to shipping, and they have started to create particular contracts for lower carbon emission shipping opportunities. And by supporting that as a product for their supply chains, effectively here the transportation angle, that is of course motivating the development of lower carbon efficient shipping opportunities and decarbonizing this huge transport element of their supply chain. At the same time, if we want to stay in the extractive space, you work with, for example, the steel industry of finding more carbon efficient means of creating steel by either moving away from coal or finding more efficient means of producing steel with less coal, for example, are means of working collaboratively across the supply chain to tackle this as a problem as a whole, rather than segregating or separating the different players within it and leaving it as a problem to them. So what we're really seeing is that the future is at working together of tackling the kind of combined system of the carbon intensity of an ultimate product, but that the big players in the markets do have a role playing there in assisting their supply chains, considering that most of them are small and medium-sized companies, which don't necessarily have the same means as some of the larger multinationals in this space.
Thank you. I mean, James, maybe you can comment on Telstra and its supply chain. I mean,
yeah, sure.
How do you monitor that?
Yeah, I mean, we do have, I mean, to be a supplier of Telstra, you do have to meet our minimum ESG standards or environmental standards. But it's quite challenging, right? So, so when you get into sort of like Telstra's supply chain, you've got a lot of sort of SMEs, small companies, and it is financially burdensome, right, to implement some of these strategies. It does cost more. So so again, Telstra does have it has its minimum standards, but it also has support available for our suppliers to achieve the criteria and improve their sort of environmental credentials. So that's financial support that we offer them. So I think for SMEs it is difficult because of that financial expense, but I think it is the responsibility of the entire ecosystems, the entire supply chain, led by, let's say, the big fish at the top, to one, promote and encourage and mandate in some cases, but also provide the financial support, both from paying more for their products and services from the supply chain, and maybe in the short term sponsor with some financial incentives as well. So it's not an easy one, but again, collaboration I think is key.
Maybe just to pick up one point there, because there is a big motivator here as companies are looking much more at their scope 3 emissions, that large companies are incentivized to do that and to really assist their supply chain to decarbonize, because they have to disclose their scope 3 emissions. More and more are deciding to do so. So that collaborative approach is beneficial for everyone.
And there's a question here about blockchain and how that fits into the tracking of goods and services from the factory right through to sort of the end user. Who'd like to comment on the blockchain effect?
I'm afraid I don't have anything to comment on that one. I'm afraid, Joanne. I don't believe we use blockchain in our supply chain. Obviously, a really interesting area and something to certainly explore. But I'm afraid I don't have any specifics on that one.
I wonder whether we could widen it out a little bit, though, Joe, to sort of use of data and digital in this space. Because certainly for us, when we're making and when we're helping our clients make decisions, you know, the information that we all now have available in a digital format, you know, if you were to look back 30, 40 years, we might have had drawings on drawing boards filed away in cupboards somewhere. You know, now there's so much data available, isn't there? There's climate data available, there's end user sort of travel pattern data available. There's data associated with all of the products that do go into the projects that we're involved in designing and, you know, working with others implementing and building. So I think what that does give us is a really great insight as to where the biggest chunks of emissions are coming from, you know, and what we can all do working together to tackle that. So no, I don't have an observation on blockchain specifically. But I do think the use of data to actually help us move forward and decarbonise is incredibly important. And I think that's the same with social impact of our projects and interventions on systems too. I think, you know, we really, again, historically, we might have conceived of a bridge as a, you know, a piece of infrastructure for its own purpose. You know, some of us happen to think they look quite nice, you know, as well as providing a river crossing. Now we actually absolutely see those as a means of connecting communities, as a means of unlocking, you know, better employment opportunities, as a means of sort of socially, sort of, as we'd say in the UK, levelling up. And again, I think that's where data and digital has really helped us to not only understand those patterns and where the opportunities lie, but also helped communities engage in the interventions that we're doing and bring them in at chapter 1 rather than at chapter 4 with a view on that intervention. So many of the things we do, there'll be embodied carbon in the intervention itself, in the bridge, in the you know, the railway line, but actually understanding that in the longer term, that is unlocking a different approach to travel or a different way of working, which wasn't there before, I think is incredibly important.
Well, I think absolutely the whole concept of big data and how data is being used. I know that, you know, we have quite a number of chamber members that have joined us in that area of big data, and even to the point of trying to even predict, you know, the next pandemic. Has been a very interesting topic for discussion, I know, here at the Chamber. But James, just thinking about, you know, Telstra and, you know, new product development and the areas that it's supporting companies with, you know, data. Is there anything you could comment on?
There isn't some really real examples, and not nice one, Denise, for sort of widening the topic outside of blockchain there, because you're absolutely correct. I mean, in the industry, it's we call it IoT, so Internet of Things. It's quite a regular term, but it's not so much about sort of chipping up everything and sort of it's the data that's produced from that and the analytics of the data and what we use that data for. So in my presentation earlier, I was talking about Telstra recycling 500,000 devices throughout the supply chain per annum. And the way we do that is through tracking those devices from production right through to end of life. So that there's barcodes, there's chips, it's controlled, it's monitored. We know exactly where those devices are. We know when they've been decommissioned. We know when they've been recycled and turned off. So part of our environmental strategy and sustaining and making sure that we dispose of those 500,000 devices per annum in a responsible way, that is absolutely using IoT for environmental purposes. But more generally, we're doing a lot of work with some of the wind farm production providers, for example, so renewable energy. So in terms of monitoring the performance of wind farms, we've got seismic data that we're producing to measure the effectiveness and make sure that they're running efficiently and producing the energy that they should in wind farms. So yes, it's a huge area. There's a lot of stuff going on, and tech. I think tech and big data does allow us to make decisions much better. and to measure, monitor, and hold us accountable as well to the results.
Great, thank you, James. Just shifting slightly, the responsibility for ESG policy, where does it lie? I mean, we can always say it starts at the top, clearly, but how are different organisations disseminating information about their ESG policies and strategies? Where's that activity mainly happening? Maybe Denise or James.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, Bauer, go on, Denise. You can go first.
Thank you. I mean, for us, it starts with our purpose. You know, our purpose is to improve society through all of the work that we do, and then kind of cascade down from there. So we have stated position papers on aspects like net zero, on living with climate change, on digitalisation, and on social outcomes. Those positions set out really clear commitments for us in terms of what we are trying to achieve. We have obviously supporting policies and directives then in how we go about that. But what's absolutely crucial to us to making a change is that every regional part of our business has an opportunity to contribute to how we'll go on that journey and set their own glide paths and trajectories. So what Ben and the team spend a lot of time doing is working with our regions, you know, with our colleagues in Australia, with our colleagues in New Zealand, with our colleagues in the US, in Canada, in India, and all other parts of the world, to really understand how their interpretation of our overarching objective can work in practice, and then what they can do to actually implement that and set targets so that ultimately we're all aligned to the 2040 net zero date, for example. But the route to getting there is quite different for those different parts of the business depending on their circumstances.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, Denise, I mean, it and to your point, Joanne, I mean, it is led from the top. So absolutely, the board has to buy into it and has to disseminate that throughout the entire organisation. And whilst it is every region's responsibility, every individual's responsibility, every department's responsibility to do what they can. I think there is a view that there does need to be a central, in large organisations, a central coordination function or business unit that does hold everyone accountable and set the standards across the organisation and do the stakeholder engagement and spread the word. So I think I mentioned earlier about Telstra's got a centre of sustainable excellence. That's a global team that operates across all the business units, and their role is to make sure that the messages are heard, take best practices from the different business units and bring it back in centrally and sort of capitalise on some of the great work being done in some of the local business units and some of the regions, but also to set the standards and get the economies of scale that's required.
And Giannis, you know, you've got a wide variety of customers or clients. I mean, what are you seeing any themes about where they're taking responsibility, you know, what areas of their organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can only second what Denise and James said. It's essential to have board buy-in, and we often see kind of the central location for ESG responsibility with the CSO, but at the same time, it's also very important that that then trickles down and that there's buy-in across the business with regards to ESG, and that involves the training of people throughout the business on relevant ESG awareness of how that affects their particular day-to-day activities, and that relates to both board level and training the directors, making sure that directors really understand the wider ESG space and specific issues that are of particular concern, such as climate change, but that the same happens for regional directors and for the workforce at large, so that they can make their decisions accordingly and integrate the business's strategy, which should incorporate ESG as a whole on a day-to-day basis, which then allows the company to actually achieve its aims, its targets. And that can be done with integrating some ESG deliverables in the remuneration structure or kind of bonus structures. And we've seen a whole range of things of how that can be done best targeted to the relevant businesses.
when we talk about large organisations like Telstra, McDonald, and the like, we, there are resources there that are available to, manage and monitor and disseminate information. But small, medium enterprises, they don't have these kinds of resources. So where can they go, or what can they do to try and develop an ESG strategy that isn't too draining on their resources? I don't know, Denise or Giannis, you'll have some SMEs as well in your portfolio.
Denise, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that organisations like the Chamber, professional bodies and others have a responsibility really to make sure that resources are available for organisations of every size, and to try and help them to sort of navigate through all of the different requirements that exist. I mean, we clearly collaborate with our SME ecosystem in different ways for different projects all around the world, Joe. But I do think that those sorts of organisations, as I say, so whether it's a professional body like in the UK, the Institution of Civil Engineers, or whether it's an organisation like the Carbon Trust, or there are many others. I think that's where, and having run the Major Projects Association previously, I think that's where I'd say that those SMEs and their trade organisations can really leverage those opportunities provided to navigate their way through the complexity of the landscape.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I very much agree with what Denise says, and there is more guidance out there, and the SME space is being taken up more by regulators, and also by just kind of international initiatives, to provide specific guidance as to how that can be integrated, trying to set not binding but guidance standards of how carbon reporting can be done for small and medium-sized companies, how climate-related information can be integrated into these processes. So that would be the starting point that I would say.
Excellent. Now we're coming to a close of this session, so I'm just going to ask each of our panelists just to have a closing comment to summarise this panel discussion. So I'll draw on James first, just to give a parting couple of words.
Great, thanks, Joanne. So one absolute pleasure to sort of like have the opportunity to talk a little bit around what Telstra's doing in this area, and to share the panel with Denise and Giannis there, who are very knowledgeable in this topic area. I think, and we will continue to track what we're doing and publish it. And I think if it was a closing comment, it would be an encouragement for everyone on the call to read Telstra's sustainability report that we recently produced a couple of months ago as part of our annual report, and that will be an annual thing moving forward. And in that, it talks a lot about what we're doing as an organisation, and a lot of the good work that we're doing in the industry in general as well. So it's a word of encouragement to read that report for everyone.
Denise?
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everybody. Really enjoyed the discussion today. I think for me, we have a bit of a strapline in this area at the moment, which is let's just turn ambition into action. There's a lot of talk, isn't there? But actually, much of what we need to do, we already understand it. We just need to get on with it. I'll probably leave it there, Joe.
Okay, good. And Giannis?
Well, I couldn't second more what Denise just said, turning ambition into action.
Oh, I think we've lost you there. You're on mute, Giannis.
Sorry, I don't know how I got muted. So I was going to say I couldn't second what Denise said of turning ambition into action more. It's something that we're very excited of really walking this pathway with our clients together. It's a journey that we are on as a business ourselves, and we want to lead by example for our clients and help our clients understand the issues ahead and navigate this new landscape going forward, but with ambition at its heart. To try to move towards a net zero future and to integrate ESG for a much more sustainable business world.
Great, thank you. And Ben, just a parting word from you.
Thank you. No, just a great discussion and huge challenges, but also really exciting that business and wider social interests are kind of aligning in this way as never before. So really exciting to be part of this project at this time. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers. I've got a parting word to say. And that's about the free trade agreement that was signed between UK and Australia in December 21. And for Australia, this trade deal is the most comprehensive it has done to address the shared challenges of climate change, environmental conservation, labour standards and gender inequality. And the deal does commit the UK and Australia to work together and to affirm both parties' commitments to uphold the obligations made under the Paris Agreement. So we do have that free trade agreement, and there are commitments there on both sides to honour the Paris Climate Agreement. So thank you everyone for a very informative session. Thank you to all our panellists. Thank you to our audience. And we will be putting the Telstra Sustainability Report on our website, so you can go and have a look at there. So thank you everyone, and have a wonderful day and evening.